So inheritance mapping. What is inheritance mapping? Today we have to go through inheritance mapping. So suppose there is a persistence class. Again, what is persistent class? Class that have uniquely identifiable values like primary key. So that is persistence class. So one persistence class in Java can have subclass. As we know, in Java we can use inheritance concept to implement or extend some classes or interfaces. Suppose there is a student class that got extended by the current student and old student, and then old student class got extended by the weekday student and weekend student. So in this case, how we are going to make this relationship inside the database? So whenever we are talking about establishing relationship between classes and database in which the class is in the form of inheritance relationship with other classes. Listen to me again. Whenever we are talking about establishing relationship between database and class, and where the persistence class is in the relationship with the different classes in the relationship of inheritance, different classes. At that time, we are going to use inheritance mapping. So first, we are going to create persistence class called student. Then we are going to extend that student in the current student and the old student. Old student also extends student. Then we are going to make two classes, weekend class and weekday class, that both classes are also going to extend current students. So this is the hierarchy model, inheritance model in the Java. So again, when we are going to use inheritance mapping, whenever the persistence class is in the relationship of inheritance with different classes. So basically, even in inheritance mapping, we have couple of types like table per subclass mapping, table per class mapping, table per concrete class mapping. So let's first one, table per subclass mapping. What will happen in table per subclass mapping is that for every table, for every class, table will be created. For every class, table will be created. Like you can see here. Let me create. First, let me copy this right here, and another one is right here. So we are talking about table per subclass mapping, which is the first type of inheritance mapping. Table per subclass mapping. So we are talking about table per subclass mapping. What will happen right here is for every subclass, table per subclass. So for every subclass as well as for the superclass, there is going to be one table. Table for this, table for this. One table is going to be created for this, also for this, and also for this one. So for every class, we are going to get the table. And the another thing that is going to happen in table per subclass mapping is that whenever we are going to insert values inside this table, suppose weekday student table, when we are going to insert values inside this table, then that value is also going to get first inserted in student, then the subclass current student, and then in the weekday student. What I said, whenever I am going to insert values in weekday student, then that value is going to first inserted into students, then current students, then inside the weekday students. Why this is going to happen? Because whatever properties is going to be inside student, that is going to be present inside the current student, and the properties is inside the student and the current student will be present inside the weekday student. So when we provide values inside the weekday student, first value got inserted inside the student, then inside the current student, then in the weekday student, and where values are going to get inserted in the database. So table per subclass mapping, table per subclass. So for every subclass there is going to be a table, and when we are going to insert the value inside the weekday student, then a student and inside the current student, that value is going to be get inserted automatically. But what will happen if I am going to insert in the student? If we are going to insert values inside the student, then those values are not going to be get inserted into the current student and weekday student, because whatever we have properties inside the student is only the inside student class or table, you can say. But what is happening inside current student, when we are going to insert values inside the current student also have the properties that is coming from the student, because it is in the hierarchy model, in the inheritance relationship. So I think you got the idea what will happen if we insert this value in the student. That value is only going to get inserted in the student, but I am going to insert value in old student, suppose, then first that value is going to be inserted inside the student, then that value will get inserted inside old student table in the database. What if we insert values inside the weekend student? That value will be inserted inside the student, then inside the current student, then in weekend student. So what will happen in the table per subclass mapping? As by the name table per subclass, there is going to be a table inside database for every class, every subclass. And another thing, second thing that will happen is whenever we are going to insert the value in the superclass, those values are going to available in the superclass, not in the subclass. But if we submit the value in the subclass, those value will also be available in the superclass. So this is table per subclass mapping. Now what is table per class mapping? Here is table per class mapping. Table per class mapping. What is this? It is a second type of inheritance mapping. So what happened in the case of table per class mapping? There will be only one table for every class. There is only going to be one table. There is only going to be one table. So why this happens? Because it is of type table per class mapping. For every class, there is not going to be separate table. every class will generate only a single table. Whatever properties we are going to define inside the student, whatever properties, fields, variables, there are going to be inside current student, inside weekend student, weekday student, and weekend student, inside old student, whatever values, fields, variables, or you can say properties are going to be inside these classes, all those will make only a single table. Suppose there is a CID and CNAME and CID inside the student, and inside the current student there is roll number. Inside old student there is phone. So what will happen? CID, CNAME. What is happening in the case of table per subclass? Suppose it also have CID and CNAME, and in current student we have roll number. So in table per subclass, if we are going to insert values inside the current student, that will first got inserted inside the student because it is of table per subclass type. But here everything, CID property, CNAME property, roll and phone, you can also say that CNAME is column, CNAME is column, roll is column, and property is column. These all columns or properties are going to be inside only one table, not different table. For a student, for properties that are inside the student, inside the current student, old student, or maybe of weekday and weekend student, all properties, or you can set the corresponding columns, are going to present inside the single table, not inside the different tables. And what next? We have table per concrete class mapping. Table per concrete class mapping. Table per concrete class mapping. What happens in this case? The third one, table per concrete class mapping. So here also for every class per concrete class, there is going to be a table. It is table per concrete class. For every class there is going to be a table. But what will happen if we are going to insert data inside the lowest class, which is weekday student? What will happen in this case? Data will only get inserted into the weekday student, not inside the student, then current student, then weekday student. It will only get inserted inside the weekday student. If we are going to insert data inside weekend student, then only those data is going to be available in the weekend student, not inside the student or current student or weekend student. Same as old student and current student. When we provide values, then the values are going to be available inside old student, not inside the student, then old student, only in old student. So in table per concrete class mapping, there is going to be a table per concrete class, and every class is going to have its own values. If we are going to provide values inside this, then that value is not going to be inserted first inside the student. It is only going to be available inside this. But in the case of table per subclass, every class is going to have its own table, and when we are going to provide values inside the weekend student, value will get inserted inside the student, then inside the current student, then weekend student. But inside the table per concrete class, only value will be inserted inside those class or those table in which we inserted the value. And the middle one, the second one, is table per class mapping, in which only one table will be get created for every properties inside the different classes. Suppose there is a property or name or variable, you can say CID and CNAME variable is inside the student and role is inside the current student. So for the current student, there is not going to be any table named as current student, and inside that we are going to have role. CID, CNAME, role, phone number, all these variable and their corresponding columns are going to be inside only single table. So basically these are the inheritance mapping theory. Table per subclass mapping. Table per class mapping, only single table will created. Table per concrete class mapping. For every concrete class there is going to be a table, but value is only going to be inside that table in which we are going to provide the value, not inside the super type of classes. So now it's time to do the codes for inheritance mapping, in which we are going to do the code for table per subclass mapping, table per class mapping, and table per concrete class mapping. So stay tuned, we are going to do codes for inheritance mapping in next video.